Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture. Today's episode, Guest Adult Face.
Before we get started, we are incredibly happy to welcome our first guest episode in, I guess, almost forever, but definitely the last year. You know him from Twitter as Mr. Haggard Hawks. He has written books about words containing words about books and other words. And he has a podcast called Yes or BS, which is fantastic. You should check out. He's got articles all over the place on mental floss. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else who's listening, welcome Paul Anthony Jones. Woo!
That introduction made me sound so good.
Isn't that the plan?
Well, yeah, but I'm not that good really in real life.
This week, our guest, some dude, he's not that great.
Yeah, I'm alright.
Maybe don't bother.
You probably know me from a Pingu gif that went viral a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
yeah, that
I
went
love
nuts.
Pingu gif.
That is now the most successful thing I've ever done online. 7 years of Haggard Hawks, beaten by a Pingu gif.
A Pingu gif about being pissed off at the weather.
Yeah.
Pingu's a strange affair, though, isn't it?
It's very bizarre. Yeah.
It feels like one of these things. You can't imagine someone actually sitting down to make that.
I know, and it's proper handmade animation, so it must take forever.
Yeah.
And you get sort of 5 minutes of whatever that is.
Really odd. But I appreciate his fury.
Yeah, it seemed the perfect combination of just doing something that you don't really want to do. And for some reason, 500,000 people decided the same thing.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Oh, dear.
So welcome, Paul. And what sort of state are you in? Are you in a state of take it away, Paul, and show us what you got? Or do you want one of us to go first, and then we'll make a Haggard Hawks sandwich?
Oh, I don't know. It's entirely up to you. I could go first, but I don't want to mess it up.
I don't mind going first.
Okay, right.
Let's go, Amy, Paul, then I'll follow
cool.
that.
I have got a couple of questions first, though, because there's no point in having a guest on and not asking things.
Well, yeah, of course.
Nothing hard.
Okay.
I wanted, first of all, is the Paul Anthony Jones a thing, or is it a publishing thing, or is it? Do you have plans to become a serial killer, or
not
the three name?
I mean, not yet. You just you never know what Haggard Hawks.
This is it.
What the next step of that is, but no, I started using it because Paul Jones on its own is potentially the most boring name in the world. So I started using my middle name because there are dozens and dozens of Paul Joneses. And then
Manfred Mann?
Yeah, well, you know what? I turned up for an interview once. Where was I doing an interview for? It's for the World Service. And I had to go to BBC Newcastle at about 20 to 5 in the morning.
Oh, my goodness.
It was knocking on the door and it was all kind of shut down. The security guard came up and he went, yeah? And I went, oh, my name's Paul Jones. I'm here to do an interview for the World Service. And he went, oh, Paul Jones? I was like, yeah. And he went, oh, we thought you were the guy from Manfred Mann. And I was like, no. And he wanted like the guy from Manfred Mann's autograph and like all this sort of stuff. So I used the middle name to avoid being confused with him. But then of course I started writing books, and now I get emails from fans of a guy called Paul Anthony Jones who writes post-apocalyptic zombie fiction. So I'll get an email every now and then going, can you tell me what happens in Extinction Point 4? And I'm like, nope.
I'd like to hope that you do tell them what happens in Extinction Point 4.
I kind of feel like, because this guy doesn't have a website, I kind of feel like I hold his entire career in my hand. Like I could reply as a total dick and just ruin his career.
The temptation to do that is, I don't know how you live with that, frankly.
But yeah, long story short, it's because there's too many Paul Joneses. But yeah, it's That's why.
Cool. And the other thing, so Paul had a book published last May called The Cabinet of Calm, Soothing Words for Troubled Times. And I was having a look at it this week, and there was something really, really beautiful that I wanted to just kind of ask you about and talk about. So the introduction to the book explains the sort of the situation under which you came to write the book, which is, it's oh man, it's totally heartbreaking. But this is, I just wanted to read a little bit of this because it made me feel good to be alive. Okay, so Paul writes about discovering a word in an old Scots dictionary and then experiencing the kind of context of that word in real life in relation to the loss of his father. And it says, it also struck me that somehow having a word like that in my linguistic armoury to describe that awful rush of pain and sorrow felt comforting. It meant that someone somewhere at some point in the past had experienced precisely the same thing themselves, to such an extent, in fact, that they felt compelled to invent a word for it. Somehow that made it feel as if I wasn't the only one struggling through this awful time. And for every word like this, I reasoned, there had to be countless others out there that could provide some similar reassurance and solace and bring a little bit of comfort to the toughest of tough times. Now, as someone who's spent most of their life thinking there must be a word for that, I just wanted to, I really, that's kind of why we're all here, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of why words are brilliant.
Yeah. This is one of these things that the kind of point I wanted to make with that was that the fact that there's a word for something means that it's sort of part of the human condition, So you're never on your own so long as there's a word for something. So it doesn't matter that no one's used it for 200 years and that no one's heard of it, and that it kind of only lives on the internet or in old books now. It's part of life, stuff like that, So people invent words and they invent them for things that happen to them. So it's a nice kind of a bit of kind of connectivity, I guess, between people and between centuries.
Yeah, absolutely. We often talk about reactivating old obsolete words because there's so many brilliant ones out there. But I really love that. When sometimes I'm a teacher, and when I teach kids to write, what I say to them is, what's the point of writing? And they usually look at me as if I'm a crazy person, which happens a lot. And the answer that I always give to that question is, it's so that you know exactly what someone else's experience is like. Because if the experiences that we all have that happen in the privacy of our own heads, unless you choose to share them with another person, they are entirely your own. And that whole thing of, I am the only person in the world who feels like this, is just approximately the loneliest thing ever, I would say. Yeah. And I think, I'm not going to cast any aspersions, but I certainly know that as a kid who was really, really into books, that sense of, holy shit, I might be a weirdo, was quite strong. I think that you've really kind of captured that. Words make us all feel a bit less weird.
Yeah, they do. I think it's that thing of because I was the same when I was a kid. There's a photo of me, my brother, and my two cousins when we were all about, probably 4, 5, and 6, and the three of them are all playing with He-Man figures, and I'm sat there with a pad and a pen, and I'm probably a 4, maybe 5, and so I was always the weird kid. So now, the fact that kind of the internet kind of connects everybody makes that sort of slightly less weird. You can kind of find people who are like yourself. And
well, there's a whole lot of weird out there.
True enough. Yeah, true enough. But words are exactly the same. It's sort of, like you say, it writing, it kind of records your experience, and then other people read it, and it makes them feel kind of less alone. That word that's in the introduction to the book, "stound," is like that. I think I'd put that on Twitter literally about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and had no idea what it was like. I just sort of thought, oh, that's interesting. I posted it out there, and it kind of drifted off. And then when it happened, and I was in a clothes shop, and I saw my dad's shirt hanging up, and I had to leave the shop because I couldn't deal with looking at it. I was like, that's what that is. And suddenly it hit home almost. The reason why this word existed is because this feeling exists. And it kind of, it's like this little pat on the back from history to kind of go, you're not the only person who does this.
Yeah. Words are great.
They are.
You'll get no deep philosophical musings here. I'm just going to sit back for a minute and enjoy words.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, anyway. So, the word I'm going to talk about today is guest.
Oh, nice.
Right.
I had to stop for a minute because it seemed like a very obvious word to talk about, given that we have a guest, which was why I was so very, very scared that one or the other of you was going to go, you're not going to believe this. But the word guest caught my attention, and I had a little look at it and discovered it is an interesting word indeed, or at least I thought so. The OED defines it as one who is entertained at the house or table of another. And you won't be surprised to hear, I wouldn't imagine, that it is old as old can be. And the first written citation that the OED gives is from Beowulf. So in terms of, certainly of written language of poetry, you don't get much older than that in terms of stuff that we still have access to. So I'm not, what, I am going to read the citation because I don't know how this stuff's pronounced, but I really enjoy giving it a go. Resed hluiade gest in the swef. And it's quite interesting that this word turns up in this poem because, of course, the story of Beowulf is about a guest who turns up and, things don't go so well and the guest ends up dead and fighting
Whoa,
ensues.
spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
Shit, we were supposed to keep that... Oh, God, oh man, I feel like such a fool. So, guest, or as it's given in Beowulf, geist with an ash, it's a word inherited from Germanic. So it's come through all the vowel combinations you can possibly imagine, basically. Geist and geist and guest. And these examples come through Old Saxon and Middle High German and all the various Germanic languages, Norse, Germanic, all these different things. Here's the interesting thing about it, or certainly the thing that I found interesting about it. It is, etymologically, from a pie root. Hooray! Because who doesn't love some pie? The pie root is spelled G-H-O-S, ghost, or sometimes given as ghosty. And I immediately thought, guest and ghost must be cognates. And of course, it's never as simple as that. And they are not. They're not in any way cognates. And if you want to know a bit more about the etymology of ghost, I suggest you go back to a certain little website called Lexitecture where I talked about it quite a long time ago. I'll admit I did have to check up on that because I had a sudden panic that I might be about to talk about a word that I'd talked about before. That would be a little bit awkward. So, Etym Online talks about guest as being an accidental guest, a chance comer, or a stranger. And this is an interesting little
cool.
facet of this word because a guest is a stranger. And interestingly, this pie root, ghosty, gives us not only guest, but it also gives us hostile.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because the word hostis, Latin hostis, which gives us this, means a stranger, but also can mean an enemy. And this is an interesting kind of turn, I thought. But it also makes perfectly good sense because you invite a guest over. Presumably there's some kind of connection that incites you to have them at your table or in your home, but you don't really know how it's going to go. Mm-hmm. Certainly not for a guest for the first time. And I mean, Paul, I wasn't terrified that you were going to be like awful.
I am pretty intimidating.
Say anything interesting, but we were pretty intimidated by the Haggard Hawks guy. You're
Shut
the guy
up,
who knows
man.
your words. So this whole shade of guest, meaning not just somebody that you invite in, but somebody who's actually a stranger, and it kind of could go either way, is an interesting shade on the word guest. And it leads to, so again, further cognates, the xeno Greek root that gives us words like xenophobic also comes from this same pi root. In ancient Greek literature, there was this concept xenia or genia. I'm not a Greek speaker, you've probably noticed that. And xenia is the code of hospitality, which is the sense not only that guests are going to come a-calling, but there is a particular way that you should treat a guest, and as a guest, a particular way that you should behave. So xenia is, it's old as old as old. There's a name for Zeus. Zeus Xenios was one of the titles given to Zeus because he was kind of the lord of this concept, this notion that there was a code by which a code that you follow that tells you how to treat your guests and how to be a good guest. But you also see it in the Iliad and the Odyssey. I mean, the Trojan War is started by a guy who, as a guest, thinks it's okay to kidnap the host wife.
Right.
Awkward.
Generally frowned upon, yeah.
Yeah, usually it's going to cause a little bit of friction. And then the whole notion of Odysseus's journey home. And of course, when he gets home, his house is full of guests, full of men who are trying to marry his wife. So you can look at the concept of xenia all the way through really kind of classic works of Greek literature, and it was a big part of Greek culture, this notion that there's a kind of a code. And this immediately made me think of bread and salt. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest here. I could tell you that I know a lot about hospitality culture, but actually I just remember that episode of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And the Red Wedding, if you recall, starts off, when the Starks arrive at the Frey's steading and house. Catelyn Stark is absolutely insistent that there should be bread and salt, because this kind of concept, which exists in all kinds of cultures, lots and lots of European cultures, it exists in Scots culture, it exists all over the place, whereby bread and salt are gifts that are given to guests, and they are gifts that kind of seal this contract. Once your guests have got bread and salt, you have to treat them a particular way.
Right.
And
that's so interesting.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Well, I had a kind of a Game of Thrones experience whereby I'd read 2 or 3 of the books when I started to watch the TV programme. So there was a bit of an overlap. So when it got to the Red Wedding episode, I knew what was going to happen. And so to see Catelyn Stark insisting that they be brought bread and salt, I was really, really interested by that, because she obviously thought, right, hang on lads, there are rules here, and once we've sealed that contract, you can't possibly break the rules that I think you might break because we don't really trust you. And of course, it didn't make any difference. It didn't do any good. Interestingly, the Red Wedding was inspired by a real event called the Black Dinner.
Really?
That happened in 1440 at Edinburgh Castle. And the Douglases, who were a very powerful family within Scots nobility, basically it was thought that they were getting to be too big for their boots, and so they were invited to dinner at Edinburgh Castle, and they were very quickly they were whisked away from the dinner, tried and beheaded as traitors.
Oh wow.
12 years later, there was an attempt at reconciliation where the 8th Earl of Douglas went to visit James II at Stirling Castle. And the idea was to kind of sort out this situation that had happened at the Black Dinner, which was not only a huge political event, but it very much transgressed upon the code of hospitality. You don't invite people to death. Indeed, invite people to death. You don't invite people to dinner and then give them death. But unfortunately, during the reconciliation, James II stabbed the 8th Earl of Douglas in the neck. And he was then beheaded and thrown out the window of Stirling Castle.
Oh, none of that should be funny. None of it should be funny, but it's all funny.
And then another very, very famous example in Scots history is the Glencoe Massacre. That meant that Campbell's and McDonald's would be enemies for centuries afterwards. In 1692, and there's as a person who grew up in a family who liked to sing folk songs, there is a very long, nobody ever remembers all the words, but a very long account of the Glencoe Massacre, whereby I always forget if the Campbells massacred the McDonald's or the McDonald's I think the Campbells massacred the McDonald's, but they invited them in out, come on in, get warm, we'll feed you, we'll look after you. And while everyone was sleeping, got up and slaughtered them all in their beds and threw the women and children out into the snow where they froze. So this notion of the code of hospitality, it's an important one, but it's not so important that people haven't, pissed all over it at various points throughout history.
Right, yeah.
We also get, in terms of interesting cognates from the Pirate, small brain malfunction there. From this Latin hostis, we get words like hostage and hostel and hospital. It leads us to some interesting hostage and hospitality, all of these things coming together, but also words like azenic, which means free of other living organisms. That was an interesting word. I'd never seen that one before.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I suppose as in no foreigners on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is good. I'm going to put that on Haggard Hawks.
Nice.
I'm going to lose my mind. and of course, this guest and stranger and guest and stranger. And then, Ryan, excitingly,
Yes.
IHAR OCS.
Hooray.
There's this wonderful word, hospodar, which I'd never heard before. And hospodar is the former title of appointed Ottoman governors of Moldavia and Wallachia, according to Etymonline.
Wow.
And it comes from Old Church Slavonic gospodi, which means lord, master, or literally lord of strangers.
That's so good.
I quite like this
like
idea
that,
of
yeah.
being lord of strangers. I feel like there's a Halloween costume in there somewhere. The
Yeah.
the kind that you spend 6 months making and feel really proud of, and everyone spends the whole night going, "You're what?" But yeah, one can be both hosted and experience hostility. One can be both a foreigner and a friend if you are a guest.
That's very cool.
That's so interesting. That sort of whole hostility and hospitality thing, I've never joined those dots before. But
I hadn't either.
It's so interesting that it's just sort of different approaches to whether the guest is known or unknown. It's kind of that sort of the approach to the person that you don't know.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
It's interesting. I initially started thinking about just the hospitality culture and how historically and globally important it's always been and continues to be in many parts of the world. But I feel like not so much anymore in the West. But just that idea of a guest specifically being a stranger is what leapt out at me at first. Like we kind of think, treat them like a guest, and what we mean by that, not to bring Disney into it, but the be our guest thing. Like it's treating someone with almost a familial level of generosity and welcoming and kindness and all that stuff. But it feels like what you're doing, or at least when I think of it, possibly because I'm a selfish dick, but it feels like what that means is you're treating them like a friend. But in the original context, you're specifically treating them like a stranger to whom you owe a duty of hospitality, which is sort of an even stronger demand on you. Like it's easy to treat a friend well in your house, but the real test is how hospitable you are when there's risk involved, which like you say, there is when you're inviting someone over for the first time because you just don't know.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a house guest who I had a house guest who was a guy I'd met in person very briefly when I was about 16, and we kind of stayed in touch over the internet, and he came to the UK, and I said, "Oh, you should come and stay. You should definitely come and stay. You're more than welcome." And he came and stayed. I was living at my parents' house at the time, and he was awful. And it was, oh God, it was the longest week of my life. And as part of the kind of terribleness of that, two other friends who I knew, two friends from Korea actually, who I knew really well and who I'd spent a lot of time with and had good friendships with, they came to stay at the same time. And what was interesting was, like, I assumed I was just being a dick. Like,
right.
I invited this guy to stay in my house to come and, come to Scotland and we'll show you around and all the rest of it. And very, very quickly thought, I am not having a good time spending time with this person. And
Right.
I basically thought, oh, you're such an arsehole. I can't believe you're treating this guy like this. And then my other two friends arrived and they were like, who is this dude and why is he in your house? Yeah, it was pretty terrible. I've just realised something else that I meant to say. You discussed this a little while ago, Ryan, when you were talking about cleave, the idea of contronyms.
Yes.
And while I was reading about the etymology of guest, I discovered a really, really beautiful word that I'd never come across before. It's largely the same as contronymy, but enantiosomy is two words with polysemic meanings which are opposites. So I suppose the same as a contronym, really. But yeah, so this idea that a guest can be both a friend, a stranger, an enemy, all wrapped up in this one word is an example of teeth in, enantiosomy.
That's a great word. I think enantio, that comes from... Is that something to do with a mirror image? Or a direct reflection? I can't...
Oh, I don't know, but I want to find out.
Because I think an enantiomorph is a direct mirror image of something. I think I might have tweeted that at some point. So there must be... I don't know enough Greek, unfortunately. But yeah, I think there must be something in there to do with reflection. So it's like an almost reflected meaning. That's really cool.
That is neat.
That's nice. There's a great word, going back to what you were saying about a house guest that kind of turned out to be a bit of a dick. There's a great word, a whittleganger, which is a house guest who outstays their welcome.
Oh, nice.
Which I quite like. I tweeted that the day after Trump lost the election.
Nice. Oh, I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was sort of vaguely apt.
Yeah.
I do love Haggard Hawks' topicality. Susie Dent's word of the day is often quite, super brutal, I think is actually what I want to say. Super brutal in a, oh, really? How coincidental kind of way. It's brilliant. But yeah, a house guest who's outstayed their welcome.
Yeah.
And it's such fodder for comedy as well, this notion of people coming to stay. Like the Black Books episode where Manny's parents come to stay. And it's just totally wonderful. So yeah, lots of comedy, but also some fairly serious stabby shit going on in the history of the word guest.
That's awesome. I always thought that the Red Wedding was based on Hengist and Horsa thing. So I hadn't heard of those other two up in Scotland. Ooh. That's so cool.
It's interesting. While I was reading about this, George R.R. Martin apparently said in an interview, "There's nothing I could come up with that history hasn't made more brutal and terrible." You know, in my worst imagination, history always manages to trump it in terms of brutality and terribleness.
True enough. Wow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
That's awesome. Cool.
Okay. Do I go
right.
now?
That's you.
This is not. It doesn't happen as often when there's only two of you, but it's a bit like when you when you are meeting someone in a corridor and you both step left and then step right. I suppose when there's three people, that kind of dynamic creeps in a bit.
It's a little more.
Is it me? What? Who's on first?
Do you go to one side or do you go to the other?
Yeah, that's right.
That's called a polka dodge, by the way.
No way!
Yeah.
There's a name for
really?
that? That's
polka
awesome!
Dodge. Yeah. Well,
It makes perfect sense that there would be a name for that.
It's one of those words that people have tried to get into the dictionary and the OED's sort of vaguely holding it back, going, nope.
That's not nearly serious
Imagine
enough.
wielding that sort of power.
I know. See, they're the real guardians of it.
There was one, I had a really terrible telemarketing job way back in the day in downtown Toronto, and I lived in one of the suburbs. So I would take the commuter train called the GO train back every day.
That's such a misleading name, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yay! Let's get on the GO train.
Yeah, crammed in like sardines, and then spend an hour there. Anyway, but the part of Toronto that I lived in was very, very busy because it was right in the middle of the city, and so it was like a typical 9 to 5, so everyone's coming and going at the same time when you get to leave and go home. But there was one time I was just it had been a brutal, stupid week, and I was just tired. And so I had, when you can see those things coming, that you can see the polka dodge approaching, and you've got someone, and you're like, I know we're going to do this, and it's dumb, and I know there's no way to stop it. It's just inevitable. It's like an asteroid approaching. There's just nothing you can do. Except what I decided to do was I just dropped my backpack and I just crouched down on the ground and just started yelling, "Go around me," over and over again. And I'll be honest with you.
I think I've heard the story before. Is this the story called Ryan has a breakdown on a train?
Well, it was on the way to the train, but yeah, that's the one. And I just dropped my bag and I just crouched down. "Go around me, go around me, go around me, go around me." And I'll tell you, I've never had an easier walk along that block before or since. Because I was talking to the one person, but all the people crossed the road. It was amazing.
Ryan, that's amazing.
There needs to be a
This
word
sort of
for
story
that.
is why we are friends.
That takes some confidence to do that. I like that. That's like taking charge of the situation.
Yeah. Normally I'll just kind of stand to one side and be like, "I'm just gonna stay here. You go that way," and then we'll sort it out like in a hallway or something like that. I'll just lean up against the wall and make it clear that I'm just parking and you can move and then do your thing and then I'll just go. But this, I just didn't have time for it. Yeah.
Sometimes I wish humans had indicator lights. It would be really good.
True.
I mean, I'm also a crazy control freak, and sometimes I wish humans would just get out of my way, particularly while walking. Although walking in a crowded place isn't really a thing that I've done for a year.
Oh, I want to be in a crowd so bad.
Yeah, I don't know. I've a love-hate relationship with crowds. I mean, I love gigs, and I love the energy of being in a big group of people. But like walking along a pavement in a busy city is not good for my blood pressure.
No.
Like I'm incredibly impatient.
See, I'm always late, so I'm always walking really quickly as well. So
and then everybody else is slow.
Yeah.
I have that going on too. I was going to say that the polka dance thing, it's like one of these. I probably read this on the internet somewhere. You know how it is, but I'm sure it was about how the fact that human beings sometimes accidentally snort when they laugh. It's like it's one of these universal reminders that we are all but animals. and the polka dance thing, it also makes me think it's like we all wander about thinking that we're in control, and then something as simple as someone walking in the opposite direction as you it just reminds you that we're all idiots.
Yeah, true. See, we just need more people to act like you, Ryan, and just take control of it.
Go round!
Just start directing things, screaming like a lunatic at 5 o'clock in the evening on a Thursday afternoon or some stupid shit.
So incredible. It's the same sort of vibe as I remember a brilliant article that I saw about a woman who decided to upset the tradition of mansplaining on public transport by every time she saw a guy with his knees spread hugely apart taking up all the space, she would just go and sit on his knee.
Oh, nice.
Like the
Fantastic.
balls required for that sort of thing are just enormous.
Yeah. That's great, though.
That's one hell of a way to take control.
Great. All right, I guess you're the chair now.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Well, the word I wanted to talk about, I know I'm like kind of Mr. Obscure Words, but I hope I'm not going to like disappoint everyone by just talking about the word adult.
Ooh, I like it.
There's a bit of a story behind why I've picked this one, because one of the things that I've been doing during lockdown is watching pornography. No, it isn't. It is. That's not why I've picked adult. It's. Is it? It is. Speaking of the word adult. No, it's. I've been doing Duolingo, which I've had on my phone for. Yeah, I've had it on my phone for about 5 years and have never touched it. But suddenly, being in the house for 23 out of 24 hours, it kind of gives you the time to do this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to. My husband's been doing Duolingo during lockdown too. He's learning German, and the meh, 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 meh noises. We've started communicating with each other using those noises.
See,
they generally mean hooray, this is good. So like Ross will say something like, do you want to go get something to eat? And I'll go meh, meh.
See, I have to have
Apologies,
it on
please
silent.
continue.
I just get too annoyed by it all. It's my problem. But I've been doing German as well.
Nice.
I'd not really done any German before. We did a year of it at school, and I'm kind of fascinated by it from afar. I've never done anything else since. So I thought, yeah, I'll learn German, and I'll come out of lockdown, completely fluent, which is yet to happen, but never mind. But one of the things that I found, because this is like the first time I've really properly tried to learn a language since I was a kid, is that now I have a sort of a language head. So any word that I can't sort of see a way into, I look up its etymology and try and kind of figure out where the
nice.
Germanic link is. And the German word for adult is Erwachsener, and I could not, for the life of me, work out where this came from, what the Germanic link was. It's this absolute mouthful of a word, Erwachsene. I could not figure this out at all. So I did what
That's mad.
Yeah, I kind of did what you do when you look it up online. And there is a link, because wachsen in German is to grow or to develop. And in English, we still have it as the moon waxing and waning. So the moon builds up towards a full moon when it waxes and then wanes away from it. And that's kind of the only context that we've maintained this in English, but it's still kind of there right at the root of Erwachsener in German. So an adult in German is kind of someone who's fully developed. It's someone who's kind of fully waxed in a
so cool.
Slightly different version of the verb than we're used to in English today.
Yeah.
So that's kind of...
I tell you what, nobody after this amount of time in lockdown is fully waxed.
Yeah, actually, I can only imagine.
I during the first lockdown, growing my leg hair was one of my low-key hobbies.
See, everyone needs something like that.
Yeah.
I went with beard rather than anything else. I kind of ended up looking a bit like Long John Silver, I think, by the end of it. Anyway, this is kind of right at the middle of this German route, but of course that got me thinking about where adult comes from, if it's not related to this at all. Adults from Latin, adultus, which I'm not great with Latin, I know you two are much better at Latin than I am, I'm sure. Adolescere?
No one knows how to pronounce Latin. Don't get hung up on it.
Good, I'll take that.
That's my official stance on it. I was raised Catholic. I was raised Catholic, but I was raised Catholic after they got rid of all the Latin, so I always kind of had a bit of a hard-on for it.
Yeah.
And then I studied it at school, but my Latin teacher was one of these absolutely tremendous, wonderful human beings and incredible teachers, and she had a very gung-ho approach to the church will say it like this, scholars will say it like that, who actually knows? Just, as long as you can render the word, it's fine.
Just go with it, yeah.
My Latin prof in university was very, he was like, this is classical Latin, and he was very, very passionate about it, which is why I took the course with him. But he would definitely be insistent on each letter has its own thing. The C is always a hard C, so adolescere was
right.
Or whatever. But ultimately it doesn't really matter. Although I do have to stop for 1 second because this is not a grown-up show run by grown-ups. Amy used the phrase, you had such a hard-on for Latin.
Yeah.
And it made me think of, Tiff Stevenson?
Yes.
She's amazing. One of the best things I've ever read was just like a throwaway thing, or it seems like a throwaway thing of hers, where she talked about how she had a teenage wide on for someone, and it was the greatest.
Have you never heard that?
I have never heard that before.
I thought you were going to talk about something different, because she had a really brilliant series of tweets where she wrote
writing about
erotica.
Men the way bad men authors write about women. Yeah,
and it was just it was so hilarious.
I think I saw that. Yeah,
it's so good. It's such a good series.
Pert foreskins and such like, and it was
pert testicles dancing gaily in the sun.
I feel like wide on is a fairly
is that a UK thing? Is that like a?
I'll put that out there. I've never heard that before.
Okay, fair enough.
A wide on.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty horrific. Let's face it. It's quite. It's
an evocative image.
I'm thinking about a sort of an adjacent phrase that is even more evocative. Probably too terrible. I might not tell you. Actually.
Wow.
No, I've got to tell you now, haven't I? But it involves the phrase "sliding down a stool." Yeah, soz.
See, there's evocative, and then there's like whatever that is.
Well, is there a word for that? You know what? I have a major is there a word for that question for you, but get on with this before I interrupt.
This tangent is going to take over.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry,
I forgot I was in the middle of it there.
No, sorry.
See, now all I can think about is stools.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
It's my special gift.
Yeah.
So, wax and wane, that's kind of where this links from. And then, adult is from adultus, which comes from this,
that's right.
which is the same root as adolescent, obviously, in English.
Right.
But the kind of root of that is alere, which is to feed or to nourish or to kind of raise up to kind of full development in Latin.
Oh, that's cool.
From that, obviously, that goes back to a great Pi root, which is either al or el. I've seen kind of different versions of it, which is a whole clutch of words to do with growing up to kind of full height or to full size or to kind of increasing in size or to nourishing up to a kind of point of kind of full development. And through that, there's like the opposite of that is where abolish comes from. It's to sort of to literally kind of stop the growth of something is to abolish it. The alimentary canal, the digestive system, has that AL in it.
I was just wondering about so the bolus is chewed up food. Is there an etymological connection between abolish and a bolus, I wonder?
Oh, that's interesting. I'd have thought maybe the bolus thing would have been more to do with its shape. Because abolish would have the AB.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that
prefix.
AB prefix, the anti, like the negative prefix of the AB.
That's interesting. Yeah. But aliment is an old word for food still in English and is still used for kind of nourishment and stuff. Coalesce has it as well to literally kind of grow together or to be nourished together. And alumnus was originally a foster child. I didn't know that. That's kind of where that comes from. And there's a whole kind of an alimony is payment to literally nourish a child is a payment to kind of raise a child on behalf of someone else is where alimony originally comes from.
That's so cool.
But there's a host of these words that goes down a kind of slightly different route where the growth the sense of growth goes into height, and it's where words like altitude comes from and altimeter and all that and that kind of side of things. But probably like the weirdest connection that the weirdest kind of veer off that this takes is altus, Latin for height, went into French where it became O-H-A-U-T. And there's an hautboy, which is a kind of old reed instrument. In French, it was an hautbois, which is where the word oboe comes from.
Oh, that's cool.
So
amazing.
It's literally a high wood, an hautbois in French. So you kind of you start with start with adult and you end up with oboes and woodwind instruments. So I went down a right little rabbit hole with this, kind of tracing it back further and further and further. But adult through nourishment and through growth to maturity goes back to height, and from there into woodwind instruments.
Awesome.
That's fantastic. That's really interesting. The alumnus, alumni thing. I had never thought of that. But then again, like you hear people refer to their alma mater.
Yeah, same thing.
Of course.
Which means nurturing mother in Latin.
Yeah.
So that familial connection with a school.
Yeah.
Is definitely there. But I hadn't made the alma mater alumni connection before. But that's
so presumably the alma mater is the mother who feeds you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nurturing mother. Yeah.
Nurturing mother, feeding
That's
mother.
interesting because alma means doll in Spanish, doesn't it?
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know this only because of the wonderful, terrifying short film, Alma. Look it up. It's on YouTube, and it's one of these brilliant little. It's not even 10 minutes. Little animated, the sort of film that you see in the run up to the Oscars because it's nominated for a Shorts Oscar, and it's called Alma, and it's about a little girl who is out, just cutting about in a city, and she sees a shop with a doll in the window that looks exactly like her.
Oh.
And I'm not going to say anything more than that because it's absolutely
that's
great.
Enough. Yeah.
But you should definitely check it out. But
I wonder if that's like the connection is sort of the learning to nurture by taking care of a doll. Like a doll is sort of like a training baby.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's
I wonder if
interesting.
that's where that's from.
Yeah.
See,
I don't know about that one.
I'm going to go and look that up now. You've struck a little note in my
Do you
head.
ever find yourself, and you know, Ryan, I'm sorry, but this happens all the time. And it's not because I don't love you and because you're not interested, but quite often when I'm having a conversation with real people, I find myself thinking, I need to go away and look up the thing that you just said. Sorry, social niceties, but
You know,
I'd
this-
actually
yeah.
rather be looking things up.
This happens because I can't handle Zoom. I don't connect at all with people on like webcams and stuff. I don't know what it is. I can't do it. And it happens all the time on that. I'll be like in a really sensible, serious meeting and someone will mention a word and I'll go, oh, that'll come from that. And I'll be sat there kind of just glassy-eyed. Like I'm sort of 10 languages away in my head and they'll go, and is that all right with you, Paul? I'm like, yeah, absolutely.
Sounds perfect.
Well, I have a problem when it comes to serious meetings, particularly because I work in education. If someone uses an acronym that I don't know the meaning of, then all I can do is think about this. My husband said something to me last week about a friend of his who's in this group. It's called MUDD, M-U-D-D. I think it's an acronym for something. And I said, what is it an acronym for? And he's like, oh, I don't know. It's some sort of like professional development thing. It's an acronym. And I'm like, no, you need to find out what the acronym is. So I Googled it and I couldn't find anything about it because, you know, there was, I don't know, some American high school, MUD, whatever. And he sort of saw it as just like a throwaway, oh, well, you don't know, never mind kind of thing. And I'm like, no,
that's
find
not
out
good.
what the acronym is. It turned out not to be an acronym at all. It was someone's name. But also,
okay.
if a person uses an acronym in a way that implies that I'm supposed to know what it means, that's even more annoying. And so if I'm in a meeting, I usually have a pad and a pen with me, so I'll spend the rest of the meeting making up alternatives for what the acronym could mean.
Yeah, that's
Which,
the best.
It causes problems, as you say, when people want you to actually take part in a professional way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terrific.
That's so cool. How do you feel about adulting?
You know, I don't mind this sort of stuff. It comes down to personal preference, how clumsy you think it sounds. But I think kind of urban and all that kind of stuff, it just shows how inventive people are still being with the language. It's exactly what Shakespeare used to do, so you kind of kind of can't complain, really.
It's hard to argue that it's new.
I think that the fact that adulting is so clumsy is kind of beautifully opposite to that whole concept of I am supposed to be an adult but I'm not good at this, which is sort of inherent. The thing that I really wanted to ask you, is there a word for this? This comes up all the time because we are not experts in language, basically. And so we tickle a concept a little bit and go, oh, this is cool, we should find out more about this. And then, you know, life happens and it doesn't come up until the next time we talk about it. But last week, I was talking about the word trampoline, and which etymologically comes from tramp, along the way. And I said that tramp is one of these kind of onomatopoeic for a feeling words. So the word tramp has that same kind of pleasure about it as the feeling of, you know, striding out confidently. And this sort of figurative, this word feels like the thing that it is. Is there a word for that?
It's almost kind of bordering on like phonotactics, which is where it's kind of like, you know, lots of words to do with slipping and sliding and snakes and slithering all have a kind of similar sound. And if you see a new word that has that kind of cluster in it, you kind of feel that it's somewhere along those lines. It's almost kind of related to that. But
like the Bubo Kiki thing.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. I'm not sure whether there's a sort of separate word for it. Maybe there will be sort of probably in rhetoric. There'll be a term for kind of the evocative side of a word. That's interesting though. I bet there is a word somewhere out there for that.
There's got to be one somewhere because it's come up. It's probably one of the most frequent kind of recurring themes of all these episodes we've done. Like it's just every few episodes we'll come up with something and it's either the word itself or it's like one of these tangent things. It's by the way, this another cognative. This is this. Which, and isn't it funny how this is another word that it's not onomatopoeia because it's not describing a sound, but it's describing either the purpose of a word or the nature of it or the feeling of it or the action that it does.
Yeah.
And of course, feelings are complicated to describe. So it's
Well, yeah.
the notion that anyone is ever feeling the same as anyone else is kind of a nebulous one at best. But I do like this idea. It's like how I get really fascinated about how some words are really good fun to say.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I would often say like it's a word that just tastes good in your mouth.
It's got a
Feels
good
in your
mouthfeel.
mouth. Yeah, and this sort of almost like a kind of a linguistic synesthesia that goes on where there are some words that just feel good.
Yeah.
I mean, my overwhelming, the only example of this I can ever think of is from Elf, where Buddy the elf answers the phone or is in a meeting or something and says, "Oh, Francisco, that's fun to say." but it is that sense that some words are really pleasurable.
Yeah.
There is a word in rhetoric, I think it's tasis, T-A-S-I-S, which is where you intentionally prolong the pronunciation of a word just because you like to say it. And it comes up in public speaking.
cool.
So you'll land on a word that you really like, so you kind of savor it when you say it. That's in rhetoric. That's tasis. You kind of wish that would be a better example of itself, because tasis isn't a great word.
This isn't a
you're
good one to
right.
do.
It's not. It's kind of like a beautiful dessert that's called, well, custard.
Yeah, I want to get tasis over with as fast as possible, but mellifluous, I will drag that shit out all day long.
Oh, now there's a mellifluous word in Cabinet of Calm. It's not exactly. It's sort of meliorism. It's not mellifluous.
Oh, meliorism, yeah,
But-
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great word. That George Eliot came up with that.
Oh, beautiful.
Oh, that's cool. Very nice. All right, well, I guess that leaves me. My word today is extremely long and complicated. It's the word face.
Ooh, interesting.
And adult guest face is pretty much a write itself title for this, so that works out again.
Guest adult face.
Guest adult face.
Face guest adult.
So this, there's so many possibilities around this. It's yeah. So this word, the thing that I was sort of wondering about when I landed on this is whether or not, like, which direction the development went.
Okay.
And whether it's like a clock face specifically, like, as a clock face taken from the fact that it has features and identifiable, is it because it resembles a human face in some capacity, or is a human face called that in this because, well, a rock face is called it because it's the front facing portion of it. And
Oh,
that's what
this
we
is
call
amazing
our face.
already.
Oh, that's good.
Our face. So which way does it go? You know, that's one of the things I was kind of like, how the hell does this work?
Ryan, tell me you have the answer. You can't just throw that out there and leave us hanging.
I have, no. So, it's also a shockingly, like, for such a word that is on its face, so simple, is the OED lists 27 different senses for the word face. And they're divided into 4 main categories. It's one of these words you look it up and you think it's going to be like a 3-line entry, but it's like 27 pages or whatever. So it's divided into 4 main categories of senses. So there's the senses denoting a part of the body and related uses, the part of a thing presented to view,
Okay.
outward form and appearance, and this one has a specific kind of connotation of artifice, like it's
Right.
the thing you put on as the outward form of appearance.
Oh, okay.
And then there's technical uses, and those technical uses are weird. Like, apparently, one of them was either of the 2 sides of a bastion which meet at the salient angle. I don't know. I know what each of those words mean by itself.
Yeah, I have no
I don't know
idea
what to
what they
make of
mean
that
together.
sentence. But apparently that's a technical use of the word face.
But there was so
And,
much beautiful assonance in that definition that I don't really care what it means.
Yeah, I don't even care.
I am
That's why I wanted
fascinated
to
by
quote it.
assonance. Just fascinated by assonance. And I love that phrase has an assonance in it.
Yeah, fascinating assonance is a great
Nice
combination
assonance.
of... Yeah.
Cool.
Great assonance on that. And then typeface is another sort of technical use. And specifically, and I thought this was, like, this is one of those ones that's like really kind of hard to parse a little bit, but when you talk about typeface, the face of the type is specifically that bit on, like, the whole metal block with the letter on it is the piece of type. That's the movable metal type. The face of it is just the raised bit. So it's hard to describe a little bit because it sounds like, yeah, stupid, the typeface is the letter. But when you think back to early movable metal type printing, the type was the whole block and the face was just the top bits that outlined the letter.
Right.
Is there anything in the world foxier than movable type printing?
That's true.
I don't think so.
You know,
I love all the subsequent stuff that, like, uppercase, lowercase,
N's and M's and all that jazz.
like
yeah,
capital, all the stuff. Yeah.
it's so great. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
That's like
so that's that.
font is related to fondue.
No.
Because font was it was originally the metal casting process produced the font, so it was to do with it being melted down.
Oh, nice.
That's
somewhere
cool.
along the line. I kind of wish I knew a bit more Latin to be able to kind of do that off the top of my head, but yeah, those two are related.
Now, what I'm mainly wondering about is whether or not font is a cognate.
Oh, yeah.
Because a font is a bowl of water.
Baptismal font or
usually.
whatever.
Yeah.
Font.
Yeah.
That's probably from fountain, I would have thought. But then where does fountain come from?
Yeah.
So you've,
And while there's no sense of melting down, there is a sort of a bowl of liquidy stuff.
yeah.
Liquidity.
Yeah.
Interesting.
See, I'm going to
Look
this
at me
up.
and my linguistic
Okay,
science.
well, now I'm going to have to go look that up too. Now, as far as, like, the which came first question, it's difficult because we're dealing with 14th century citations, which
Sure.
means that it's basically impossible to tell which one was actually in usage first. The earliest citation, the first one that got written down is the front of the head sense. So just the anatomical, the area where your eyes and mouth live. And that was from around 1300. But it's only a couple decades later that there was a slightly different sense of it, and it is to refer to the expressiveness of the face. So like a smiling face,
Okay.
or to keep a straight face.
Right.
Specifically talking about the emotive abilities and capacity of the front of your head, not merely the anatomy. Which I'll admit is a very subtle, like, splitting hairs difference. Interestingly, the idea, the phrase making a face doesn't show up until the 1500s.
Oh.
So you could have a smiling face, but a face that you sort of putting on a face, pulling a face, that didn't show up for another couple hundred years, which struck me as being slightly weird.
I mean, people have been doing that since the beginning of time, haven't they?
Yeah, I'd have thought that would have been a lot earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that. I thought that was really interesting.
If ever there's a beautiful example of how written down things are not necessarily accurate dated things, I think it's that one. Yeah.
I'm sure. And then the idea of face being the outer or upper surface of a thing, like the face of the earth, the rock face or whatever, that's cited in the later 1300s. So 1382 is that citation. But even then, when you're dealing with just like 80 years in the 1300s in written citations, it's a total crapshoot.
Yeah, sure.
And that, so the upper outer surface of a thing, the outward appearance section where it's talking about the putting on a brave face or an artificiality of it, a false front type of thing, that shows up around then as well. So it's really hard to tell. What's slightly weird is, well, I'll get to that later. The word comes to English from French, and the French word face, which basically has all the same varieties of senses as in English. So that's no help, because it sort of looks like all of these senses arrived at the same time through Anglo-Norman.
Damn you, French.
Yeah. And the French all showed up. Before French, of course, it comes from Latin, fascia or fascia from facies, meaning appearance, form, or figure. And Edom Online basically posits that this is, quote, probably is literally form imposed on something. Because ultimately in Latin, it's from facere, meaning to make. So the same
Right.
basis for
wondering about
factory
that.
or fact. And so the idea is this is the form you impose like on a coin or on a facade of a building or a something like
That's super
that.
cool.
The American Heritage Dictionary's Pi Index has this lineage going back to a Pi root spelled DHE, and it looks like it has taken a couple of different phonetic turns. So sometimes it sort of goes into a TH root. Sometimes it gets a P or an F. It just sort of depends on which language has inherited it and what it does with it from there. But it gives us lots of cool cognates, including things like facade, artifact. But it also gives perfect, counterfeit.
Oh.
It gives us the FICE ending of office, because it's the place that work gets done, or the place that you make things or work is the office part. And it gives us nefarious was on there as well.
A small round of applause, because not enough people use the word nefarious.
No, nefarious is a great word. And what nefarious was from is it's got that any negative prefix, meaning not, and fas meaning divine law. And so this is just me conjecturizing the crap out of this, but I think my guess is that is something to do with sort of the idea of an a priori law that was sort of set down or made first among all laws type of thing, like that idea, the laws of nature type of sense.
The laws of hospitality?
Hospitality. Weirdly, facetious has nothing to do with this.
Ah, okay.
I thought for sure facetious, because it's got face right there. It must mean something, but facetious is not connected at all. Doesn't, yeah. Stupid. And so I had to look up, I had to consult Smith. So Paul, one of my favorite things, and Amy actually got me a hard copy of this as a gift when I graduated law school, was Charles Smith, Reverend Charles Smith back in the 1800s did a book called Synonyms Discriminated.
Another beautiful assonance.
It's basically like a reverse thesaurus, where he tries to sort of say, okay, these people think of these things as synonyms. Here's why they're actually different, and here's how the senses are subtly different from each other.
Right.
And it's I love it. I love his writing style.
It's word porn, pure word porn.
That sounds right up my street.
Yeah, I find it quite cool, because not only because he's got a really good way of shining a light on the differences between these words, but also because it sort of goes, oh wow, sometimes you find a word that you wouldn't have thought today wouldn't have been thought of as a synonym at all, but it's an interesting window into what used to be considered synonymous and how some of those things change. So this one, he's discriminating between face and front.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And so I'm just going to read this part because I'm boring and nerdy. So he says, the face is the countenance or features. The front is the whole anterior side of the figure, and so the words might be supposed simply applicable according to this analogy. But the analogy is not easy, because the Latin frons means forehead, and so face. For instance, the face of a clock is analogous to the face of a man, but we should hardly say the front of a picture, but the face, though it be more analogous to the whole front of a man. The face of a house is the surface of the anterior wall of it, as the posterior wall is the back. On the other hand, the front of a stage is strictly according to the analogy. So even Smith is like looking at the difference between which came first, the front of a thing or an actual face of a human, and going, I don't know. And he rarely gets to the, I don't know, you figure it out stage of this analysis, but I quite like when he does, because it makes me feel better. The other thing I found interesting with this is that it kind of reminded me of our chat about the word dog, where English is rarely just on its own. It's almost always like, oh, English pulls this from this. It's that joke about English is the language that just waits for other languages to walk by the dark alley and then just beats them up for the change in their pockets and takes them. It's rare that it's just like, oh, it's the English word and nobody else uses this, but dog was like that, and this is sort of like
I'm sorry, I must correct you, because Mbabar, oh no, I can't remember the name of the language, and I'm laughing because I think the language is called something like Mbamlam, which of course made you say, whoa, Blackberry.
Whoa, Blackberry, yeah, obviously.
But I'm pretty sure that dog and the English and Mbamalam, which is...
Yes, there was one other, yeah.
Yeah, it's this one tiny little, fairly niche language that I'm sorry, I've forgotten where it was from. But they also have...
I think it was from West Africa. Like, it was this very obscure connection. Yeah,
and it's just coincidental, isn't it? That it's developed kind of... That's so bizarre.
It's so beautiful.
It was a very weird... It was a very weird thing. That's one of my favorite words that I've looked up was actually the word dog. It was very cool. But this is kind of like that insofar as the Old English word that was replaced by the Anglo-Norman fas to become face was undulata, which was from a root meaning to look, or ansun, which was from a root meaning to see. And most other European languages get their words for face from the word to see.
Oh.
So in Greek, it's prosopon, which basically just literally means look forward. Lithuanian has veidas, which is from the root meaning to see. And even in French, this treacherous French, they changed their word for face, the human face, from face to visage, which comes from the same Latin word that gives us visual.
Right.
So it's even like, so the French sort of lobbed this weird Latin connection with factory and fact, threw it into English. English took it, and then French went, that doesn't make much sense anymore. We're just going to call it the thing you look out of, or the thing you look at on another person, and switched over to visage. So it's, in short, no, I don't have the answer. And it's all sort of weird.
That's great.
That's so interesting. It's got me thinking...
The worst or best way to end.
It's got me thinking about the word surface, because the surface is the face. So why is it the surface? Because
it's like that inflammable...
Yeah.
It's like, why do you need the sur there? Yeah. Of course it's on the face, because it's the face.
So that seems sort of unnecessary.
It definitely does. It's a redundant... There's an internal redundancy there.
Oh, come on. We're speakers of English. We really can't talk about
that's true.
The efficiency of language.
Yes, that is very true.
Fair enough.
I do want to point out, Ryan, just when you were talking about the French and other European roots, that a prosopopoeia is a figure of speech in which an abstract thing is personified. And it's from the wonderful book that I was talking about, Elements of Eloquence. There's a chapter in that about prosopopoeia.
That's cool.
But yeah, it's nice. It also has made me think that when we were talking before about is there a word for that, a word that kind of makes a feeling, that if we were to compose one ourselves, it would still have that poia ending. Because prosopopoeia, Greek-wise, literally means makes a face.
Yeah.
Onomatopoeia means makes a name. So whatever the Greek for feeling is, that's the word that we need to describe this thing that we keep trying to describe.
That would be it, or the essence or something.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Which in itself is a complicated concept to nail down in just one word, especially when you don't know that much about Greek. So answers on a postcard, please, to anyone who's cleverer than I am.
That's interesting.
Really cool. I take it that facet and face are cognate. You know, the notion of the faces of a shape, or the faces. I'm thinking of a diamond specifically. The other thing I was wondering about is the figurative notion of being two-faced.
Yeah, there's an old expression that I came across in this. It's two faces under a hood.
Oh, nice.
Which I love. But same kind of idea. The idea of, and it's sort of that kind of combines the two senses of your anatomical face, like sort of your actual nature, and that outward appearance that you put on. Mm-hmm. And those two faces are at odds, and they're different. And then you get that sense of duplicity, and duplicity is duplicate, so duplicity is also two-faced. So that's fun there as well.
Wordception. And also the notion of putting on a face as in putting on makeup.
Yes.
I was kind of thinking about...
so many of those, yeah.
Yeah, about that sense of... Because every time that you've talked about putting on a face, you've given it that kind of spin of duplicity, of this sense of telling a lie. Although I suppose the same could be said about makeup, really.
I saw there's a Canadian stand-up comic whose name I'm blanking on, and I hate that I'm blanking on it because I love this man. But I saw him perform once, and he did a bit about how he was just about to go. He had some sort of interview, something important where he had to look good, and he had this massive blemish on his face, and his wife was just like, "Here, just use this and cover it up, and then I don't know, sort yourself out, you idiot. Go do your thing." And he was like, and I put this little dab of the stuff on, and it disappeared. And I looked at my wife horrified and said, "I have no idea what you even look like."
Yes, we are cunning creatures.
But yeah, the idea of putting on a face, or even stuff like face cards, or like as long as the list of actual sort of senses was that list on the end that the OED gives of all the different kind of analogous and expressive and expression and phrasal uses of the word was even longer.
Yeah,
like it just goes on forever.
Yeah, I was wondering where to lose face comes from. If you kind of
that one actually
sort of lose your prestige or you be humiliated.
That the closest I could come up with for that is that I found something that basically just attributes it to Chinese, because according to, and I do not speak Chinese.
Which Chinese language are you talking about?
Sorry, I see. I'm so yeah. This is one of those. I'm not being offensive. I'm just being stupid. I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just dumb. It was a Mandarin phrase, apparently.
Did you just pick one and guess? Go on.
Yeah.
Tell the truth.
Yeah. The word. Because then I'm obviously just wrong and not a prick, right? Like that's how this goes. I'd rather be wrong. I'd rather just be incorrect than an asshole.
Yeah, I get it.
But it was actually this word spoken in a language that is commonly used in the country we now know as China was literally just that's what the word for being embarrassed meant in that Chinese language.
Oh, that's really cool.
So it's,
and was sort of like a negative prefix. It was basically like an equivalent of the word deface.
Yeah.
Here.
Red-faced.
But it meant to experience shame, to lose standing, to lose stature, to be embarrassed or whatever else. And then English just kind of mugged it in an alley and drugged that into.
Yeah, sure.
Fished around in its pockets, found that in the
You're
change
my wife
and brought
now.
it into
That's
English.
interesting. So it's a loan translation. That's interesting because they're pretty rare.
Yeah, that's the example I could come up with. Because that was one of the things that I thought was weird as well. And I was like, I wonder where that. But yeah, from
Chinese.
A Chinese dialect meaning that. Yeah.
Nice.
There's something like tu lian without any attempt at making a tonal difference. I probably just said 8 different things all at once. But
No, I'll give you that, dude. Yeah.
But that's apparently the word. And I did look up, just the most rudimentary of quote-unquote research, as in I typed the word face in English into Google Translate and said, give me what this is in my defense, Google gives the option of just simplified Chinese. And so it was that word lian, which is the root of the word that I found earlier for to lose face.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
One of my,
so I translated loan.
One of my most favourite, I don't know, I feel like I should have talked about this before, but I maybe haven't, but I'm currently teaching the novel of Mice and Men to a group of teenagers who don't love it nearly as much as I do. But
right.
it really is. It's one of these novels that I've read it, like 20 times maybe, and every time I read it I find something else in it that I didn't notice was there before. And just when you were talking about face cards, there's a beautiful, just almost throwaway moment. First of all, George and Lenny, always plays solitaire. And it's just this random, seemingly inconsequential thing that he does where he lays out a solitaire over and over again, showing what a lonely character he is. But there's a part in the novel where he's doing this and Lenny kind of looks over his shoulder and he looks at one of the face cards and he says, how come it's the same at both ends? Because, if you turn it around, it's the same picture. And it's this absolutely glorious way of expressing the kind of foreshadowing of the novel. It's the same at both ends.
Right.
Regardless of what your dreams are and what you want to happen, you can't get away from it. You know, the picture is drawn and the stage is set. And it's really, really gorgeous. I absolutely love it.
That's so cool. I wonder if there is some sort of like a real link to the face card idea then. There must be, because the number of expressions that we picked up from gambling and from card playing and things, there'll be someone in there as well for face cards, I'm sure.
Yeah, something like that.
It's interesting.
I feel like I now have a list of about 40 things that I need to go and look up and find out more about.
It's always what happens.
Yeah, it's kind of
And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard in this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.